You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 1, an introduction from Rob and Josh. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and with me I've got my co-host Josh Galicki. Hi, Josh.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Rob. How's it going?
Going well. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah. So I sent Josh an email a few weeks ago, and I said to him, I've got this mad idea to start a podcast about wildlife photography. What do you think? You interested? And you bit my hand off, surprisingly.
Yeah, I love podcasts, and there's not many podcasts when it comes to wildlife and nature photography, and it's just a subject that I think would be a lot of fun to explore, and there's so many different topics. So yeah, I was very excited to hear from you.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a bit, but I thought what we'd do is we'd start off by just giving people a little bit of background on each of us as a sort of intro bio, if you like. I think most people will probably know of us, but why don't you kick off, Josh, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your sort of photography background.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm a wildlife and nature photographer. I started photography, maybe about 10 years ago. I started with avian photography, birds for the most part. I was a birder most of my life, and that has expanded into all forms of wildlife. And I try to shoot locally as much as I can in the Washington, D.C. area, where I've been working for the past number of years. And also, I try to travel the world whenever I can. So whenever I have time off, I'll try to get to, some far-flung places to take photos. It's my passion. It's something I definitely plan on doing as much as possible, even while I'm working, and certainly after my professional career is over. I plan on doing it full time. So
yeah. Well, I got to know you through Bird Photographer of the Year when I was running that competition, obviously, and you did tremendously well in that. Pretty much every year you entered, I think.
Yeah. It was a great competition, and I just started submitting the competitions a couple of years ago, and I really enjoy it. It's actually elevated my photography when I see all the great work around. And photography these days, it's so competitive. There's so many more photographers than there were some years ago, and everyone's pushing the envelope. So it's inspiring as much as it is rewarding.
Well, we will get on to talking about that in another episode. And in fact, I think the sort of second episode that we're planning is going to be called The Future of Wildlife Photography, where we're going to perhaps talk about, how styles have changed, and where they're going, particularly with my involvement and your involvement with obviously Wild Art Photographer of the Year now. Because obviously you're a judge for that competition, because I loved your work, and it was through the sort of submissions that you made to Bird Photographer of the Year and the consistency of what you were turning out. I just thought, no, I've got to have you as a judge on this if I possibly can. And thankfully you said yes. But anyway, great stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. The photography is so dynamic, wildlife photography, and it's constantly changing. And to your point, there's been, when you look at the entire industry over the past few years, and when you look at what's actually an artistic wildlife photograph, we've seen it in wild art. It's starting to evolve, and things are changing moving forward. So it's going to be a great discussion. I really appreciate you reaching out to me, Rob.
Yeah. Well, if people don't know, about me, let me give everybody a bit of background as to where, I've come from effectively. But I sort of started life as a landscape photographer, actually. And it was through my love of just my general love of the outdoors and particularly walking. Is where that all started. But I got the opportunity, it must have been about 2008, 2009, to get involved with what was then a film-based natural history photography library. And it was the person that was involved with that wanted a sort of transition to a digital based library, and I came in and helped with that, and basically returned a load of the old sort of 35mm slides to all the photographers, and changed that library into or put it into the digital space, as it were. So that's really where my sort of wildlife photography interest was sparked. And I thought, oh, no, actually, because I love wildlife anyway, I've always been interested, but I've never had an opportunity to get a sort of foothold into that arena. And that offered me a really good opportunity. And through that came the opportunity to do Bird Photographer of the Year as well. And I was one of the founding directors for that competition. And, I ran that for the first 5 years of its existence. And we all know how well that competition has done now, with over 20,000 entries a year, something like that. So that was a real privilege to be involved with that. But when my association came to an end with that competition a couple of years ago, I've always really enjoyed, and that competition was I guess it was responsible for my change in attitude towards the way I take photographs, from the sort of more literal to the more artistic, and that's the way I wanted that competition to go. And when that came to an end for me, I just thought, well, this gives me an opportunity to perhaps open up, and develop a new competition which focused on that element, and open it up to all the taxa groups. So it wasn't just birds; it was everything else. It was wildlife in general, and so Wild Art Photographer of the Year was born. And of course, I've been running that now. Well, we're in our sort of second year now with that competition. I mean, year one was just phenomenal. I mean, I couldn't believe the response from everybody. It worked. I mean, it just worked brilliantly well. And it's obviously structured a little bit differently, as I think most people will know. If you don't, then head on, go and have a look at the website, which is Wild Art Wild Art Poty for photographeroftheyear.com. So have a look at the website and you'll see what it's all about. So, that basically in a nutshell is me. And I just, this sort of love of wildlife and photography, it's just a perfect combination for me. And I've really enjoyed the journey. And I just thought, a podcast, along with the competition, and along with the YouTube channel, which has evolved from some of the live events that we've been doing with Wild Art, I just thought was a natural extension of everything. So here we are. Yeah, so let's give people a bit more of an idea of what to expect from the podcast. And I just thought, there are so many subjects that we can talk about. I mean, I've got a whole list of things written down. So many of these sort of rabbit holes that we can we could end up exploring, as it were, and everything perhaps from sort of interviews with well-known wildlife photographers to conservationists, and how photography works for conservation, through to techniques such as composition, such as perhaps setting camera settings, and how using different settings can create different effects, different lighting effects, sort of backlighting, bokeh we were talking about before we started recording this, and perhaps sort of rim lighting, and all those sorts of things. We can delve into those subjects as well, and of course perhaps talk a little bit about gear. I mean, I know a lot of people, there are a lot of podcasts out there that talk about gear, so that's not going to be the center of everything, but I think we'll include a little bit about that sort of thing as we go forward. But I just thought that there are so many subjects that we can cover, and we'll just evolve as we go along. And if listeners have got suggestions of things that they want us to discuss, then obviously happy to take on board what people want, basically.
Yeah, and I think what's important too is, in listening to these podcasts, the information will be helpful to the viewer. I listen to many podcasts where it's all about the host. And look, we're all lifelong students when it comes to wildlife photography, and there's a lot to talk about. But ideally, when you listen to these podcasts, you'll be able to pull information out, and information that might be useful to you, whether it's discussions around composition, usage of different techniques in the field, gear. There's so many things to talk about, and we hope that it'll be helpful for you as a photographer to get something out of the podcast rather than just listen to our stories.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, sort of going down that sort of wild art theme, and the thing that I've been trying to hammer home to people, that it's about inspiring people on their own photographic journeys. So if you listen to the podcast, or you watch some of the, the YouTube videos, for example, if you take one or two little things away from that, which you can then incorporate into your own photography, which perhaps improves it or takes you down avenues that you've never explored before, then this is what it's all about. This is what we're trying to do with this podcast. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first subject that I thought Josh and I would talk about would be the future of wildlife photography, and from the point of view of photographic style rather than perhaps the sort of future of wildlife as such, when we all know, how much trouble that's in, with climate change and the pressures on, the majority, the majority of things that aren't human. Basically, we seem to be persecuting virtually everything on the planet. But no, I thought, we take it down the road of, the sort of future of artistic styles, because we've certainly seen a change. There's certainly been a change in my photography, and I know that, your own photography, Josh, is changing as well. It's developing, it's evolving, from perhaps the sort of more literal photographs that, you and I think, both started taking when we first got into wildlife photography, through to exploring the more artistic side of things, which certainly seems to be the way that a lot of photographers are going, particularly actually from Europe. I have to say, they seem
Hmm.
to be sort of leading the way.
Yeah, Europe is definitely the dominant trend when it comes to moving away from the literal wildlife photography into the more artistic. And I think that trend overall has been happening over the past 10 years. And I think there's a combination of things also as part of that. Focal length. Years ago, the longest lens you could find in terms of focal length was the lens you went out into the field with. If you had a 600, you put a 2x teleconverter on there and you go out in the field and you try to get as close as possible to the animal. Those rules have, obviously changed over the past few years. You mentioned even wildlife numbers and the persecution, conservation photography. If you are going to be literal, a lot more is expected of you. You should be telling a story. You should be talking about the plight of, telling the story around the plight of the animal in the photograph that you take, or the circumstances around that animal. So there's a lot is expected. There's many more wildlife photographers out there than there were years ago. So if you want an image to stand out, you really need to have an inspiring image. You need to have a thoughtful image, and it needs to evolve. When you look at wildlife photography in general, it's much more competitive, and people are pushing the envelope. The last thing people want to do is look at more images. Less is more. So you have to make a statement when you make an image.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, certainly from your own Instagram account, I know that you never post anything that you don't believe is not top notch work, because it's that's sort of representing you as a photographer, and there's no point
Yeah.
in putting mediocre stuff up there just because you need to put an Instagram post up.
And that's a huge challenge too. I mean, we live in the age of social media. Instagram is really the premier platform when it comes to showing off your photography. Unfortunately, it's a very small platform when it comes to the image size. So, there's always that constant balance for photographers. Do you want to post more often and have more engagement, or do you want to post less often and have higher quality material? So this has always been a challenge when it comes to photographers.
Right.
I've tried to choose less is more.
Yeah, well, there's another subject for a podcast, of
Yes,
course. That's a social.
absolutely.
I mean, hasn't photography has changed so dramatically in the last 15 years, in particular, and there is just a plethora of stuff available online now. Whereas, if you go back 20 years, I mean, there was nowhere near what there is now, even though we were sort of into the digital age just about by then. The way things have progressed. Do you think about those sort of first digital cameras that were coming out? And I owned the original Canon 5D, and I remember
Wow.
thinking, wow, this is just an amazing piece of kit. And now you look at it and you go, 12 megapixels, you've got to be kidding.
Even in the past few years, I was shooting a Canon 5D Mark IV in 2019, 7 frames a second. I have a Canon R3 right now, which is just a few years later. I'm at 30 frames a second, let
Yeah,
alone all the other capability, animal eye focus, and so forth. So it's
yeah.
the technology is improving exponentially.
Yeah, and of course I switched allegiances a few years ago, so I'm a Nikon shooter now. And you look at the Z9, and it's like, yes. And you look at the Z9, it's like, what? This is crazy.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's another great subject for a podcast, because I'm a great believer in that not only do people have gear acquisition syndrome, it's a real disease, which is which is encouraged by the camera manufacturers, obviously.
Yeah.
But I almost feel that sometimes, gear is like a uniform that people think they must have. So to be a
Hmm.
wildlife photographer, you've got to have a 600mm prime, otherwise you're nobody. How can you possibly take a picture without a 600mm prime and without the latest camera body, which we all know is absolute nonsense,
Hmm.
because
Absolutely.
I don't own a 600mm prime lens, because I don't, for the style of photography that I do, it's not worth me investing in it because I
Yeah.
wouldn't use it often enough. So
I often
it's
find when I'm in the field, Rob, if I have a 600 millimeter lens, it actually holds me back. I was just
yeah,
shooting about a week and a half ago. I was down in North Carolina in the Outer Banks, and I had a 600 millimeter lens on me, the only lens I had. And I had these beautiful scenes of shorebirds walking by, but there were all these dunes. The sunset was incredible behind them, and I had a 600 millimeter. I couldn't capture that, and I was capturing just snapshots for the most part. So in many cases, these longer focal lengths they hold you back.
yeah. But as I said, to my point, it's almost like it's a uniform. This is
Yes.
a rite of passage. You're not going to be accepted by the wildlife photography community seriously unless you have a 600mm prime attached to the latest camera body that does a gazillion frames a second.
And
And
yeah.
that means you have to buy a memory card, which costs you £600 to be able to make use of the frame rate. I mean, the world's
Yeah.
gone kind of crazy, but I mean, it's brilliant. All this tech is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but anyway, it's
Yeah, and I often
pra-
find with a lot of new photographers, the tech comes first before the composition skills, before a lot of the other things start to fall in place. So folks who enter the field, whether it's a hobby or whether they're doing it professionally, there's that drive, that gas, as you say. I like to say gas. Actually, it's a pretty funny acronym, but
yeah,
there's that drive to get the gear, and the hope is everything kind of falls in place quickly thereafter. Certainly, you can get more shots with better gear when it comes to an action sequence, for instance, or when it comes to low light, for instance. It will help you in certain situations. But when it comes to the basic fundamentals of an incredible image, that is not that is not key to getting a great image. Key is, in my
yeah,
opinion, composition, having an eye, envisioning a shot, and taking the tools that you have and making them work, and making them sing.
yeah, exactly. I mean, buying a Ferrari doesn't make you a good driver, does it?
Exactly.
And it is exactly the same thing. You need to learn. You need to learn the skill set. And fieldcraft. I mean, fieldcraft is the most important element of wildlife photography, and that's something you can't buy.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
agree.
experience.
Like you, I was a birder for many years, and I understood bird behavior. Where preferred habitats. When birds were active, how they moved, judging their posturing when I'm in the field. So that gave me a huge advantage. I think from my perspective, it's a lot easier to be a birder and then a photographer after versus the other way around.
Yeah,
I think once you understand the animal, whether it's a bird or whether it's an insect or a mammal or frog or what have you, if you understand the animal's behavior, and you know how to approach the animal, uh, the rest is gravy.
but I think that's sort of goes for all genres of photography, doesn't it? I mean, if you
Yeah.
are a street photographer, or you are a sports photographer, or you're any of those sort of
Hmm.
any of those and any of those sort of genres of photography, then you need to understand the subjects.
Yes.
It's like you need to understand what's happening in a soccer game, for example, to be able to get the best shots. You need to
Hmm.
understand how a Formula One car goes around a circuit, and what to expect to get the best out of it. You need to be passionate about those things first and
Hmm.
foremost, and that makes you a much better photographer, I think. And
Agreed. Even when you're not in the field, camera trapping, for instance, it's all about understanding your subject, understanding where the subject's moving and its patterns and so forth. So whether you're in the field or outside of, or off the
yeah.
field, understanding the
Well,
subject is key.
there's another great subject for a podcast. Look, I mean,
Yeah.
we're chatting. I mean, this is it. This is what it's all about, folks. To be honest,
Yes.
it's like I said to Josh when we first sort of started talking about this, that actually isn't it just about sort of two friends talking about wildlife photography?
Mhm.
and just introducing these subjects which we can talk around, and that really is the basis of the podcast. It's Josh and I just sit here talking about things and seeing which rabbit holes start appearing, and I think quite a few have appeared already, actually, as we've just been
For sure.
chatting. So I mean,
Yeah.
we hadn't really planned any of this out at all. I just literally said to Josh when we sort of started the call, let's just do a quick introduction and talk about a few things and see what happens. So, and we've already started exploring, quite a few of the subjects, which I think that, we can do in more detail in future episodes. So, anyway, but
Yeah.
I hope that's sort of given people a bit of an idea as to how mad this might get. We go through sort of future episodes, and I also said to Josh that it's no good us, I think, sort of trying to plan to do too many. So I think probably one a month is where we're going to be at to start with, because what I'd rather do is put out quality content rather than try and rush 2 or 3 4 things a month, and it all it does feel a bit rushed. I prefer it with sort of quality content over quantity. So bear with us, and we'll start at that sort of pace, and we'll see how it builds. But as I said, I think the first thing that we can talk about, and we've already touched on, obviously the second episode is going to be about the future of wildlife photography, and we'll delve into some of the things we've just touched on in a little more depth. So Josh, thank you very much for your time this evening, because we're recording because Josh lives in the States, and I'm in the UK. The time difference means that we normally do this late in the evening, so it's coming up. Well, it's gone 11 o'clock for me.
It's a bit easier for me than it is for you,
yeah.
Rob, but absolutely.
Hey,
Yeah, not a problem.
it's a good job I'm a night owl. That's what I say. Anyway, thanks very much for coming on and having a chat, Josh. And I look forward to our future chats and the next episode. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you all again next time.
Thank you all.
You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.